I'm Danielle Carter, 28, and last Thursday my brother Darren humiliated me so publicly, so completely, I could feel my soul crack under the weight of his words. We were at Whitestone Credit Union, the bank he manages like a Roman emperor holding court. I wasn't asking for a handout, just a $99 withdrawal from my own account. But Darren? He leaned over the glass counter, looked me up and down, and said with a smirk that practically echoed, "You sure you even got that in there?" Then louder, "This is a bank, Danny, not a donation box." The laughter from the staff still rings in my ears. What he didn't know, and what would flip his smug little world upside down, is that 3 days earlier, I became the sole heir to $2.8 billion. Yes, billion. And in less than 24 hours, Darren would be the one on his knees. But before we get there, let's rewind. I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky. Darren was 4 years older, stronger, louder, and for as long as I can remember, obsessed with winning. If he got a B plus and I got an A, he'd challenge the grading curve. If I landed a role in a school play, he'd audition the next year just to outshine me. Our parents fed into it, always praising his hustle. "Darren's a go-getter," they'd say. "Danielle's just artistic." Like art was a virus they hoped I'd outgrow. He was valedictorian. I was that girl who draws. He got a full scholarship to business school. I patched together freelance gigs between barista shifts. At family gatherings, Darren made sure everyone knew he managed 8 figures in client assets by the time he was 25. I made sure the paper plates had doodles on them. The rift between us grew with every year, especially when he got promoted to branch manager at Whitestone Credit. Suddenly, he was wearing custom suits, driving an imported coupe, and treating anyone without a trust fund like they'd tracked mud into his perfect life. Especially me. Still, I kept trying. I invited him to my art exhibitions. He never came. I mailed him a hand-drawn card for his birthday one year. He posted a Rolex selfie with the caption, "Gifts that matter." I didn't even rate a thank you. But I hit rock bottom 3 weeks ago. My lease was up, and the studio I rented for both living and painting was being turned into a Pilates studio for affluent moms. I'd just lost a freelance contract, the last steady gig I had due to budget cuts. My bank balance? $114. And I needed $99 of it to pay the deposit for a shared room I'd found on Craigslist. Not glamorous, but a roof over my head. So I swallowed my pride and went to Darren's branch. Not to ask for help, just to access my own money. I walked into Whitestone wearing my best blazer, one I'd thrifted and re-sewn 3 times. My shoes were worn, but I polished them the night before. I looked presentable. I needed to be. I waited in line behind a guy in a designer coat casually moving $15,000 between accounts. When I finally stepped up to the teller, I handed her my ID and quietly said, "I'd like to withdraw $99. She typed for a moment, then paused. Her brows furrowed. "Just one moment, please." From the glass office up above, Darren saw the exchange. I watched him rise, straighten his navy suit, and stroll down like he was about to deliver a sermon. He clapped a hand on the teller's shoulder. "Don't worry, Lisa. I'll handle this." "Danny," he said, as if I were a stranger. "Here for a donation drive?" "It's my account," I said, trying to stay calm. "I just need to withdraw $99. He looked at the screen, smiled. "That'll leave you with what, $15? Brave move, sis." I didn't reply. He leaned in closer. "Maybe try GoFundMe next time. Or hey, your fans on Instagram." He air-quoted the word fans like it was dirt in his mouth. Then, looking around at the staff, he said it. "This is a bank, Danny. Not a donation box." Laughter. Snickers. One guy even muttered, "Ouch." I felt like I'd been slapped. I turned and walked out before the tears could fall. My legs carried me to the bus stop, but my soul felt like it had collapsed in on itself. That ride back to my apartment was one of the longest of my life. But you know the funny part? I wasn't even surprised. Humiliation was Darren's love language. I got home, sat on the mattress I dragged back from a sidewalk last fall, and opened my laptop. That's when I remembered the email. It had landed 3 days earlier from a firm called Brigham and Lee. Subject line: Estate finalization. Urgent response required. I'd skimmed it, assumed it was spam, and forgotten all about it.
But now?
Now I opened it, and my whole world changed. The email was legit. It came with a notarized letter, scanned IDs, and a direct contact number. I called, got put through to a sharply spoken man named Simon Lee. "Miss Carter," he said, "we've been trying to reach you regarding your late great-uncle, Franklin Braddock." Franklin? I vaguely remembered the name. My mother's eccentric uncle. He used to send me postcards from strange places: Mongolia, Paraguay, once even Antarctica. We hadn't spoken since I was 14. I thought he was long gone. "Your great-uncle passed away 6 months ago," Simon explained. "He named you sole heir. The estate includes liquid assets, investments, properties across 4 countries, and stock from an early acquisition in a biotech company that recently IPO'd." I laughed. "Okay. So how much are we talking? A couple grand? A cabin in Vermont?" Simon paused. "As of this morning, Miss Carter, the estate is valued at approximately $2.8 billion. Silence. "Hello," he said. What?" My mouth had stopped working. He chuckled softly. "Most people don't believe it, but we've verified everything. He left you a letter. It's being couriered to your address. I recommend you read it before speaking to the press. Or your family." I hung up in a daze. $2.8 billion.
Me.
The girl who couldn't afford a security deposit. The artist mocked by her own brother. The beggar. I didn't sleep that night. The letter arrived the next morning. Handwritten, faded, and as strange and poetic as the man himself. Uncle Franklin wrote, "Danielle, the world mistook me for a madman. Maybe I was. But I believed in the impossible. I saw that same glint in your eyes when you were just 12 and mailed me a watercolor of a seahorse made of stars. Everyone said it was childish. I saw it was genius. You reminded me of myself, eccentric, passionate, underestimated. That's why I left it to you. Not to Darren. Not to your parents.
To you.
Because I know you'll turn the money into magic. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I wept. And then I made a decision. I was going back to that bank. Not to rub it in Darren's face, but to reclaim every ounce of dignity he'd tried to strip from me. And maybe, just maybe, see what $1 billion revenge looked like. The next morning, I rose early. The sun hadn't even crept over the Lexington skyline yet, but I was wide awake, adrenaline humming like electricity in my veins. I didn't need coffee. I needed closure. My phone buzzed with a message from Simon Lee confirming my appointment at Arcadia Private Holdings, the firm handling the consolidation of Uncle Franklin's assets. There, I'd finalized the first step, transferring $500 million into a new trust under my name, with complete liquidity within 24 hours. The rest would be diversified through investments, real estate, and philanthropic grants. But first, I had a little detour to make. I slipped into the sleek navy pantsuit I'd bought on a whim the night before. I hadn't even removed the tags yet. It was my first designer outfit, not from a thrift store, not borrowed from a richer friend, and when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see broke, desperate Danielle anymore. I saw a woman who was finally done playing small to keep others comfortable. I paired it with a soft silk blouse, low heels, and a simple necklace, a charm Uncle Franklin had sent me when I turned 16. A tiny brass compass. "Go your own way," the note had read. I hadn't understood it back then. Now I did. The Uber ride to Whitestone Credit Union felt strangely surreal. The same roads I'd taken so many times before, but now everything shimmered with possibility. The world hadn't changed overnight, but I had. Outside the bank, I tipped the driver generously and stepped out. It was 9:03 a.m. The bank had just opened. A few customers were already trickling in. The security guard at the door gave me a casual glance, then a second, slower look. I smiled politely and walked past him like I owned the place. Inside, the air was crisp and cool, the faint scent of leather and coffee lingering in the lobby. The same Beethoven sonata played overhead. Same marble floors. Same smug little world Darren ruled like a petty monarch.
Perfect.
I spotted Lisa, the teller from yesterday, at her window. She looked up, her eyes scanning me quickly, trying to place the face under the expensive outfit. She flinched when recognition dawned. I walked to her window. "Good morning," I said smoothly, offering her a neutral smile. "Is Mr. Darren Carter in?" He's in his office," she said, voice slightly tremulous. "Do you have an appointment?" "Tell him Danielle Carter is here. And I have some business that requires his personal attention." She hesitated, eyes flicking from my outfit to my calm expression.
Sure.
One moment. I waited. Across the lobby, I could see the other tellers whispering. Even the assistant manager looked up from his desk. The transformation had begun. They didn't know who I was, but they knew I wasn't someone to laugh at anymore. A moment later, Darren emerged. And, oh, what a moment! He was wearing a charcoal gray suit, his favorite power tie, hair immaculately styled. At first, he didn't recognize me. Then his jaw went slack. "Danielle," he said, walking toward me. You look different." I turned slowly, letting him get the full effect.
New suit, I said.
New week. New fortune. He blinked. "What are you talking about?" "Don't worry. I'll explain. But not here. Is the executive conference room available?" He glanced around, confused and cautious. "That's usually reserved for." "I know. Premier clients. But trust me, Darren. After today, that policy will need rewriting." He stared at me for a beat longer, then gestured stiffly. "Follow me." We walked in silence past the curious stares of staff and customers. He opened the glass door to the conference room and stepped inside. I followed, setting my leather folder gently on the polished mahogany table. "All right," he said, trying to reclaim control. "What's this about?" I sat down. "I'm here to make a deposit." "A deposit?" he repeated, clearly baffled. "Danielle, if this is some stunt." "It's not," I said crisply. "And I'd appreciate it if you took me seriously this time. Like you would any other multi-billion-dollar client." He laughed, but it came out more as a nervous hiccup. "Look, if you're trying to get back at me for yesterday, I opened the folder and slid the documents across the table. His eyes flicked down. "Read." Then reread. His face drained of color. He picked up the first page with trembling fingers. His lips moved as he skimmed the legal language. Then he hit the number. $2,804,000,000. He dropped the paper. What is this?" "It's my new account balance," I said simply. "Technically my holding company's, but I'm the sole beneficiary. Effective 3 days ago." He stared at me, horror dawning like a slow sunrise. "You're lying." I leaned back. "Call the firm. Simon Lee. Arcadia Holdings. They'll verify everything. Or better yet, ask the CEO of GenX Biosolutions. Uncle Franklin's shares went public last quarter. His estate sold them last week." "Franklin Braddock," he whispered, pale and shaken. "Bingo. My godfather. You might remember him as the crazy world traveler Mom always laughed about." "I thought he was broke," Darren muttered. "Turns out, eccentricity is just wealth wearing sandals." He sat down slowly, like his knees had forgotten how to function. I let the silence stretch. When he finally spoke, it wasn't with sarcasm or smugness. It was fear. "What do you want?" "First," I said, sliding another sheet across the table, "I'm moving $1.2 billion into a series of charitable trusts, starting with a grant for underfunded artists and inner-city art schools. But I want the accounts managed here." He blinked. "Here? At Whitestone?"
Yes.
"I'd like my accounts opened under the oversight of your team, with you as branch liaison." Why?" he stammered. I tilted my head. "Because yesterday, you mocked me for asking for $99. Today, I'm giving you custody of nearly $500 million in trust accounts. Let's see how you handle real responsibility." He swallowed hard. "But before that," I said, voice hardening, "I want to make a withdrawal." He perked up, readying his hands over the table. How much? I held his gaze. $99. The silence that followed was one for the record books. Excuse me, he croaked. You heard me. $99. Same amount as yesterday. He stared at me like I'd grown a second head. You're doing this to humiliate me. No, I said evenly. I'm doing it because yesterday you treated me like a stain on your marble floors. You called me a beggar. And I want you to remember this moment for the rest of your life, when the same woman you mocked turned your entire world upside down for $99. He looked like he might faint. I stood. I'll be at Lisa's window, I said. Tell her the withdrawal is approved. And tell her, I paused, that kindness costs nothing, but cruelty might cost you everything. I walked out before he could speak. When I reached the teller's counter, Lisa's hands were trembling. Darren appeared a moment later, walking like a man headed to a funeral. He nodded once. She handed me the cash. 99 crisp dollars. I tucked it into my wallet, smiled, and turned to leave. The bank was silent. Every employee, every customer, they were all watching. And as I reached the door, Darren's voice called out behind me. Wait. I turned. He wasn't standing anymore. He was on his knees. I'm sorry, he said hoarsely. Danielle, I messed up. I was cruel, arrogant. I treated you like garbage. And you didn't deserve that. I looked down at him, the man who had spent his whole life needing to feel bigger than me, now kneeling. I know, I said quietly. But thank you for saying it. He stayed there unmoving. And I walked out, not with vengeance in my heart, but peace. He had dropped to his knees. And I had finally risen. The automatic glass doors hissed shut behind me, and I stepped into the morning light feeling more grounded than I had in years. Not because of the billions, not because of the suits or bank staff whispering my name like a prayer, but because for the first time ever I didn't let Darren win. I didn't retaliate with spite. I didn't scream. I simply made him see me. The Danielle he'd ignored.
Dismissed.
Belittled. And all it had taken was $99. I walked down the steps of Whitestone Credit Union, sunlight warm on my face. A valet approached me, mistaking me for one of their ultra-high net worth clients. I waved him off politely and continued to my modest rental car. No limos. No media frenzy. Not yet. I wasn't interested in revenge tours. I was interested in reclaiming my life. By the time I pulled into the underground garage of Arcadia Holdings headquarters, Simon Lee was already waiting in the marble-tiled lobby, tablet in hand, suit crisp, and expression unreadable. Miss Carter, he greeted, voice professional but tinged with something new, respect. Mr. Alvarez is ready for you upstairs. Mr. Alvarez? I asked. Our head of legacy strategy, Simon replied. Given the scale of the Braddock estate, he'll assist in long-term planning. I followed him through a secured elevator and into a sleek boardroom overlooking the city. There, two more executives were waiting, Ms. Naoko Ren from Philanthropy Services and a quiet man in a gray turtleneck who Simon introduced only as Arjun, their discreet investment whisperer. Before we begin, Simon said as I settled into a leather chair, we'd like to acknowledge that most clients in your position choose to move slowly, get a feel for the temperature. But your decision to establish your presence so quickly, especially at Whitestone, was effective. I smirked. Let's call it performance art. Naoko smiled. Well, it's made you the talk of the town. Bankers across the city are already whispering about the $99 billionaire. Arjun slid a document across the table, an asset diversification proposal for my review. While they outlined options for global portfolios, green startups, even a boutique film fund in Paris, my mind kept drifting back to Darren. Was he still on his knees? Figuratively, probably. I hadn't decided what role, if any, I wanted him to play in my new reality. Not yet. After the meeting, I returned to my hotel suite, temporary accommodations provided by Arcadia while my future was being carved into financial bedrock. The penthouse was luxurious, sure, but sterile. Beautiful in a catalog kind of way. I missed my cluttered studio. the smell of paint, the constant hum of possibility. I grabbed the old sketchbook I'd carried for years and flipped through half-filled pages. There were drawings from dark days, abstract bursts of frustration and fear, but also sketches of dreams I hadn't dared speak aloud. A mobile art van, a downtown gallery that doubled as a free youth studio. I had plans now, not to flaunt wealth, but to build something real. The next day, I met with my lawyer to establish the Braddock Carter Foundation. Our mission: support overlooked artists, especially young women in underserved communities. Uncle Franklin's legacy would fuel new visionaries, not just my bank balance. We launched quietly, no media splash. Just a direct email to select organizations, offering grants no one saw coming. That night, my phone buzzed.
Darren.
I stared at the name on the screen. Let it ring out. He called again, then again. Eventually he texted, "Please, I need to talk. I know I don't deserve your time, but I'm asking anyway." I hesitated, then typed back, "Tomorrow, 6 p.m. No suits. Meet me at Marlowe Park." Marlowe Park was where we used to ride bikes as kids, before competition poisoned every moment. Before life became a scoreboard Darren needed to win. The next evening, he arrived wearing jeans and a sweatshirt. His hair was windblown. He looked human. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure you'd remember how to dress like a regular person," I replied. He chuckled, then sobered. I deserved that. We sat on a bench, facing the duck pond. A group of kids kicked a soccer ball nearby. Their laughter drifted on the breeze. "I don't know how to start this," he admitted. "Try honesty." He nodded. "Okay. The truth is, I've been awful to you. For years. I told myself it was your fault, that you weren't trying hard enough, weren't practical enough. But it was me. I was jealous." I turned. "Of what?" "Of your freedom," he said. "Your passion. You never seemed scared to follow your dreams. And that scared me." I swallowed. I was scared all the time. I just didn't show it. We sat in silence for a while. Then he said something I never expected. "I want to step down from my position." "What?" I blinked. "Why?" "I don't deserve it anymore. And I'm tired, Danny. Tired of the image. Of being the successful one. I want to start over. Maybe even do something that matters." I looked at him, really looked, for the first time in years. "What would that look like?" I asked. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But maybe you could help me figure it out." I thought of Uncle Franklin's letter, of his belief in second chances, in the magic of redemption. I reached into my bag and handed Darren a folded paper. He opened it and read the header. "Proposal, the Braddock Carter Foundation, Director of Outreach." He looked up, stunned. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a clean slate," I said. "You said you wanted to do something that mattered. Help me find the artists who don't get seen. The kids who've been told they'll never make it. You know systems. I know stories. We could be partners, if you're willing to earn it." He stared at the paper like it was a lifeline. "Thank you," he whispered. "Don't thank me yet," I said. "We have work to do." He folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his jacket. Then he stood. "I'll see you Monday. Don't be late," I warned with a smile. He grinned. "Wouldn't dream of it, boss." As he walked away, shoulders a little less rigid, I looked up at the sky. It was turning the color of lavender and peach, soft and forgiving. And in that moment, I realized something important. The money had given me power. Yes. But forgiveness? That had made me truly rich. Monday morning, Darren showed up 15 minutes early. I watched him through the glass walls of the Braddock Carter Foundation's new downtown office. He stood near the entrance, clutching a leather-bound notebook, looking both eager and nervous. He wore a crisp but casual button-down, no tie, no suit. For the first time in years, he looked like my brother, not a caricature of a corporate shark. I opened the door with a nod. "You're early. Trying to make a good impression," he said, offering a half-smile. "Also, nerves." I arched a brow. "You ran a multi-million-dollar branch. What could possibly scare you here? He exhaled. This feels different. Real. And it was. The foundation had quickly become more than a passion project. It was a growing machine of change. We had secured a warehouse space on the west side to convert into an art center, launched 3 microgrant programs, and signed partnerships with schools and shelters across the state. Darren's job? Outreach Director. A title I didn't give lightly. He would be responsible for managing partnerships, creating equity programs, and ensuring transparency with our donations. This wasn't a handout. It was a challenge. And I could tell he knew it. Our staff, 5 people and growing, greeted him politely but coolly. They'd heard the story. Everyone had. The viral headlines didn't just cover my windfall, they documented the incident at Whitestone Credit Union like a courtroom drama. They knew what Darren had said to me. What they didn't know yet was whether he'd changed. By lunchtime, he was buried in paperwork. I kept an eye on him from my office, watching him ask questions, take notes, listen without ego. He wasn't coasting on charm. He was doing the work. Later that week, he joined me for a tour of a youth center we were considering funding. A local nonprofit in the South End had turned an abandoned church basement into a sanctuary for at-risk teens. They had murals covering cracked concrete walls, donated instruments in the corner, and students making music with broken strings and hearts full of fire. Darren was quiet as we walked the halls. A volunteer handed him a sketchbook, crude but powerful drawings from a 15-year-old named Jacob. Raw depictions of street life, trauma, resilience. When we got back to the car, Darren sat in silence, staring out the window. I thought money meant power, he said finally. But those kids have more courage in their fingertips than I ever had with a spreadsheet. I said nothing, just started the car and drove. Weeks passed. Our foundation expanded. Word spread. Artists began sending in their work, hopeful and hungry. We funded community murals, youth poetry programs, even a mobile photography lab that toured rural schools. We hosted our first gallery exhibit 2 months later. The room buzzed with nervous energy and the smell of fresh paint. Every wall was lined with artwork from our grant recipients, portraits, abstracts, digital collages, kinetic sculptures. At the back of the gallery, a small plaque caught my eye. It read, "To the girl who only needed $99 to remind the world what she was worth." I felt my breath catch. Darren had written it. He stepped beside me quietly, holding a glass of sparkling water. "I didn't put your name on it," he said. "Didn't want to embarrass you." I turned to him. "It doesn't embarrass me. It humbles me." He nodded. "I still have a long way to go. I know that. But every day here feels like I'm finally building something instead of just hoarding titles." I believed him. And so did the room. Slowly, the staff warmed to him. The artists began inviting him into their process. He showed up early, stayed late, and never tried to steal the spotlight. It was unfamiliar territory for Darren, but he leaned into it. Our parents, on the other hand, didn't know what to make of any of it. They'd gone from ignoring my career to obsessing over it, part pride, part confusion, part opportunism. Suddenly, my mother was bragging to her book club about her visionary daughter, while my father sent me links to startup ventures in need of strategic capital. Subtle, they were not. I dealt with it calmly, politely. Boundaries had become easier to enforce now that I didn't need validation. One day, Mom asked if I'd consider funding Darren's return to business school, just to refresh those credentials. "He's already doing the work he needs to do," I said. "And this time, he's earning it on his own." She looked confused. "But don't you think it would help the family's image?" That's when it hit me. This wasn't about helping Darren. It was about preserving the Carter name, about packaging our story into something clean and glossy, palatable to country club friends and wine night gossip. I leaned forward. "Mom," I said gently, "Darren and I are finally becoming real siblings. Not mascots for your cocktail anecdotes. Let's not mess that up." She blinked. I didn't mean it that way." "I know," I replied. "But maybe it's time we all learn to mean things differently." Later that week, I called a family meeting. Just me, Darren, Mom, and Dad. No press. No estate lawyers. No performance. We met at the family house, where it had all started. The place where my sketchbooks were once called a phase, and Darren's report cards were framed like diplomas. I stood in the living room, memories flooding every corner. I called you here, I began, because we need to reset how this family works. Dad frowned. Reset? I'm not your miracle, I said. And Darren's not your trophy. We're people. We've been through a lot. And we're trying to rebuild something better. Darren nodded. We're not asking for praise. Just space to grow. Our parents didn't say much at first. But when we left that night, Mom hugged me longer than usual. Dad patted Darren's shoulder and didn't say anything sarcastic. It was a start. The next few months were a whirlwind. I was invited to speak at TEDx about creative wealth, how I turned inherited money into a movement rather than a monument. The video went viral. A writer from Forbes called my story a masterclass in poetic redemption. Others labeled me the artist billionaire, which made me cringe, but I understood the branding. But none of it compared to the day we reopened the Braddock Center, our art warehouse, now transformed into a vibrant, pulsing hub of creativity. Darren stood beside me at the ribbon-cutting ceremony.
He didn't speak.
He didn't need to. His name wasn't on the building, but his effort was in every brick. As the crowd applauded and cameras flashed, he leaned over. I still think about that day in the bank, he said. Every morning. It grounds me. I smiled. I think about it too, but not with bitterness anymore. I was so lost, he admitted. I thought power meant stepping on people. Turns out it means lifting them up. We watched a group of kids rush into the center, paint-stained hands ready to create. They're going to build things we can't even imagine, I said softly. And they would, because now they had the space, the tools, and maybe a little inspiration from a girl who once asked for $99 and got everything she never knew she deserved. The Braddock Center became more than a foundation site. It became the epicenter of a movement. We didn't just give artists money, we gave them mentorship, resources, and most of all, validation. They weren't starving creators anymore. They were visionaries, inventors of feeling, and Darren, strangely enough, was one of their most vocal champions. He organized weekly Creative Fridays, where donors and community members were invited to tour the space, meet the artists, and see where their funding went. He facilitated conversations between once dismissive businessmen and the same teenage girls whose poetry had made entire rooms cry. And as for me, I painted again. Not to survive, but to breathe. For the first time in years, I picked up a brush without fear. No hunger behind the stroke. No anxiety behind the colors. Just expression. One morning, I arrived early to the center before any of the team showed up. The light in the east wing was perfect, soft golden hues bleeding through tall windows, spilling onto blank canvases. I pulled out a fresh one and started painting. Nothing planned. No final form. Just movement. Brush to canvas. Color to thought. It was a swirl of storm blue and defiant gold. A piece I later titled Before the Knees Bent. When I finished, Darren walked in carrying coffee. He paused mid-step, seeing the canvas. Wow, he said. That's... He didn't have the words. So I gave him mine. It's not about you. But it was born from that day. He nodded. I deserve that. No, I replied. You deserved a wake-up call. This is mine. He tilted his head. Your wake-up call? That I could rise even if no one clapped. That my worth didn't need his or your validation. That I was never the beggar in that bank. He handed me the coffee. You weren't. We left it at that. Later that month, I received a message from Simon Lee. Danielle, would you consider meeting with the board of directors at GenX Biosolutions? They'd like to invite you to speak at their upcoming shareholder summit. They're positioning you as a cornerstone legacy figure. Not just an heir, but a visionary in your own right. I stared at the message for a long time. Uncle Franklin had once been a ghost in our family, spoken of in whispers, mocked as eccentric. Now, the company he'd built wanted me on their stage. Still, I hesitated. I hadn't done this for legacy. I'd done it because no one else ever opened the door wide enough for people like me. But after some thought, I agreed. The summit took place in San Francisco, in a shimmering glass tower that overlooked the bay. I stood backstage, wearing a midnight blue dress and a pair of earrings I'd bought from a young metalsmith we funded through the foundation. As I stepped up to the mic, I looked out at a crowd of hedge fund managers, startup prodigies, and reporters with notepads poised like weapons. And then I told them the truth. I was humiliated in a bank lobby for asking for $99, I began. 3 days after becoming a billionaire. That moment didn't define me, but it crystallized something I never forgot. The difference between having money and having worth. You could hear a pin drop. I was never poor in talent, or vision, or courage. I was just poor in opportunity. That's what money gives people. It's not power. It's permission. To create. To fail. To rebuild. To rise. They stood when I finished. Not everyone, but enough. Later that evening, as the sky bruised over the Golden Gate, I got a call from Darren. "You killed it," he said. "You watched. Live stream. I even clapped. I laughed."
Good.
I needed that from my biggest heckler. There was a pause. Then he said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on me." My throat tightened. "You gave me every reason to, but you also gave me one not to. You changed. So did you." Maybe we both had. In ways no dollar sign could measure. By the end of that year, the Braddock Carter Foundation had reached 5 countries, impacted thousands of young creatives, and seeded nearly 50 new community art projects. But the biggest impact? It was in my own life. I was no longer the girl chasing validation. I was no longer the artist scraping together rent with 2 jobs and a bruised ego.
And Darren?
He wasn't the man who mocked his sister at a teller window. He was the brother who now walked beside me, who spoke softly and listened deeply, who didn't need to be the loudest voice in the room to feel worthy. The world hadn't changed, but we had. And for the first time since childhood, that felt like enough. 6 months after my inheritance went public, I visited my old neighborhood. The streets hadn't changed much, same cracked sidewalks, same faded murals. The corner store where I used to count quarters to buy ramen still stood, though the sign now flickered and buzzed like it had a nervous tick. I parked down the block, not wanting attention, and walked. It was quiet in that early afternoon lull, sunlight spilling between buildings and catching on rusted fences. I passed the alley where I'd once painted a sprawling Phoenix mural, my first real public art, now faded and tagged over, but still visible beneath the layers. I traced the lines with my eyes, remembering. Not everything needed saving. Some things needed remembering. I was here for a reason. Down the block was a storefront, boarded up now, windows dusted with grime, the faded letters above reading, "Grace's Art Supply." It had been shuttered for years. The place where I bought my first charcoal pencils. Where I'd begged Grace to hold sketch pads behind the counter until I could scrape together enough for them. I found her number through a mutual connection. She now lived in Arizona, retired, and nearly cried when I called. "I thought the place was gone for good," she'd said. "Too many shops like that disappear. I want to bring it back," I told her. "Not just as a shop, as a tribute." We signed the transfer paperwork 2 weeks later. I bought the property outright. Renovation began immediately. A few weeks into the remodel, Darren and I walked the site. He wore a hard hat too big for his head and boots that didn't match his outfit. He looked ridiculous. He also looked happy. "I still can't believe you're doing this," he said. "Grace gave me a place to dream before I could afford it," I said. "This city needs more places like that." The new Grace's Art Supply wouldn't just sell supplies. It would be a nonprofit community hub, offering free materials to low-income students, hosting workshops, and doubling as a tiny gallery. "You going to cut the ribbon?" he teased. "Nope. You are." He blinked. "What? Me?" "You mocked me over $99, I said. "Now you can help me hand out $1,000 worth of paint." He didn't argue, just smiled and nodded. The day we opened, the sidewalk was packed. Kids from all over the neighborhood came. Artists, retirees,
Teachers.
people who remembered what the store used to be, people who needed what it could become. I stood behind the register as a little girl, no older than 8, approached the counter with wide eyes and a fistful of crumpled bills. She held up a small sketchbook and whispered, "Can I get this?" I leaned forward. "How much do you have?" She uncurled the bills and revealed 3 singles. I smiled. "You know what?" I said. "That's exactly the right amount." Her face lit up, pure joy radiating from her smile. She ran out holding the sketchbook like it was treasure. And in that moment, I felt something more powerful than revenge. Redemption. That evening, Darren and I sat on the back steps behind the building, watching the sunset bleed across the skyline. A local guitarist played softly in the distance. "I keep thinking about how much I used to care about things like margins and status symbols," he said. "I thought success was a zero-sum game. That if you were up, I had to be down. That's what they taught us," I replied. "Win or lose. No room for both." He nodded. "I've been wrong about so much, Danny. But this foundation, this store, it feels like I finally stopped trying to prove something." "You stopped performing," I said, and started showing up. We sat in silence, letting the air fill the space between words. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Do you think Uncle Franklin knew what he was doing when he left you the money?" "Yes," I said. "He saw something in me no one else did. But I think he also saw what I could help unlock in others." "Including me?" I met his gaze. "Especially you." He exhaled, and for the first time, I saw him not as the golden boy or the arrogant banker, but as a man trying, truly trying, to become someone different. Someone better. He wasn't perfect. Neither was I. But that wasn't the goal anymore. Later that night, after Darren left, I stood in the store alone. The smell of new wood and fresh paint still lingered in the air. I walked to the shelves, ran my fingers across neatly stacked sketchbooks. Then I spotted it. A slip of paper, folded and tucked behind the register. I opened it. It was from Grace. "Danielle, I always knew you'd come back. Some seeds take longer to bloom. You were never just a customer here. You were hope. Keep planting." Grace. I smiled. There, in the quiet, in the place where my dream first sparked, I realized the truth. I never needed billions to change the world. But with them, I could finally light the fires that were waiting for a single match. 3 weeks after Grace's reopened, I was invited to speak at a local high school's career day. I almost turned it down. My calendar was packed and public speaking still felt like walking a high wire barefoot, but then I saw the name of the school. Lexington East High. My old school. The one where I used to sketch during math class, daydream in the back row, and get called unfocused by teachers who mistook creativity for distraction. So I said yes. I didn't want to be the billionaire on the hill. I wanted to be the girl who came back. Not with a lecture, but with truth. I walked into the gym that Friday morning to find folding chairs in neat rows and a faint smell of wax and old sneakers in the air. Students shuffled in, chattering, nudging each other when they saw me. Most of them didn't care that I was wealthy. But they listened when I said, "I was one of you, sitting in those chairs, wondering if anything I loved would ever pay the bills. And I'm here to tell you something nobody told me. Just because a dream isn't traditional doesn't mean it's impossible." I talked about art, about poverty, about failure. But mostly I talked about power. Power doesn't come from money, I said. It comes from deciding your story isn't over, even when someone tries to write your ending for you. A few rows back, I spotted a girl with paint smudges on her jeans and a look in her eyes that I recognized, hope mixed with defiance.
She didn't clap at the end.
She just nodded once. That meant more to me than any standing ovation. Afterward, I spoke with a few students. Some asked about the foundation. Others just wanted to know if I really had been broke. One boy asked if I missed being normal. I smiled. Every time I see someone forget how powerful they are. On the way out, the school counselor stopped me.
"Thank you," she said.
We've had CEOs and politicians speak here, but your talk hit differently. You made them feel seen. That stuck with me. Because for so long I hadn't been. Back at the foundation, things were moving fast. We just closed on a new property, an old theater we planned to convert into a performing arts space. Darren had spearheaded the proposal, his excitement contagious. He called it the revival.
Fitting.
He was thriving in this world, in ways I never imagined. He still wore nice watches, still drove a luxury car, but the man inside was different. He asked questions. He listened. He never once mentioned his old title at Whitestone. One afternoon, as we reviewed blueprints in my office, I caught him staring out the window. "Something on your mind?" I asked. He turned slowly. "I've been thinking about legacy." "Oh,
Yeah.
about how we all chase it, like it's this trophy we can hold. But maybe it's more like a garden. Something we plant, water, and hope will keep growing long after we're gone." I smiled. "You've been reading those quotes on the walls again, haven't you?" He laughed. "Maybe. But I knew it wasn't just the quotes." He was changing from the inside out. And so was I. Later that week, we hosted a fundraiser gala. Not for glamour, but to connect with the broader community. Artists spoke. Students performed. Even one of our grant recipients, a sculptor named Alana, unveiled a breathtaking piece in the courtyard, a towering phoenix carved from reclaimed metal, wings outstretched as if about to take flight. People cried.
So did I.
After the event, as staff cleared dishes and string lights flickered overhead, Darren and I stood beneath the sculpture, champagne in hand. "You know," he said, "for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing something I won't regret." "High bar," I teased. "I used to think regrets were for people who failed," he said. "Now I realize regrets come from forgetting what actually matters." I clinked his glass. "Then let's keep remembering." We walked the quiet halls of the foundation that night, our footsteps echoing in the stillness. Each corner held stories now. Portraits of artists we'd helped, scraps of poems pinned to cork boards, the soundproof studio where kids recorded spoken word. It felt alive. It felt earned. And somewhere between the silence and the shared dreams, I realized we were no longer the version of ourselves who walked into that bank. We weren't rich or poor. We weren't successful or struggling. We were just human. And for the first time, that was more than enough. 2 months after the gala, we received an email that made both Darren and me stop mid-conversation. It was from Whitestone Credit Union. More specifically, from the regional director. The subject line read, "Ms. Carter, we'd like to make things right." Attached was an invitation to be the keynote speaker at their upcoming Regional Leadership Summit. The irony didn't escape us. The very bank that had reduced me to tears over a $99 withdrawal now wanted me to stand on their biggest stage. I showed Darren the message. His face twisted into a grimace. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm not saying yes," I said. "I'm just intrigued." "They don't want reconciliation," he muttered. "They want a photo op. A redemption story they can co-opt." "Exactly," I said. "Which is why I'm considering it." He blinked. "Wait, you are?" I nodded. "But not to give them what they want." He crossed his arms, cautious but curious. "What would you say to a room full of corporate bankers?" "The truth," I said. But this time, with a microphone. Darren exhaled. "Just don't hold back." "Oh, I won't." I accepted the invitation. The event was scheduled 3 weeks out at a downtown hotel known for hosting polished professionals and political fundraisers. I requested no press, no advance agenda, no pre-written talking points. They agreed. The night before the event, Darren and I sat in my office, eating takeout over grant applications. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked. I looked at him. My brother, once my tormentor, now my fiercest ally. "I've been ready since the day you told me to go to a check cashing place." He winced but nodded. "Fair." When I arrived at the summit the next morning, I wore a simple black suit. No designer logos. No elaborate jewelry. Just confidence. The ballroom was full, over 300 people in attendance. Branch managers, financial advisors, even a few people I recognized from that fateful day at the bank. Tyler, the teller, was there too. He avoided my gaze. I took the stage without fanfare. The room quieted almost instantly. I stood at the podium, let the silence stretch. Then I began. "You know who I am," I said. "But do you remember who I was?" Murmurs swept the room. I was the girl who came in for $99. The one who walked out in tears. Not because I was poor, but because I was made to feel small. A few people shifted in their chairs. I wasn't asking for a loan. I wasn't asking for pity. I was asking to access what was mine. And what I received instead was public humiliation. I paused. And then I became a billionaire. Dead silence. Not because I hustled harder than anyone. Not because I climbed your corporate ladder. But because someone saw value in the very part of me that your system overlooked. My creativity. A man near the front rubbed his temples. You measure worth in numbers. But numbers lie. Dignity, however, that's real. A few heads nodded. Here's the irony, I said. Had you treated me with respect, I would have opened my accounts here, made investments here, helped you build something bigger than your balance sheets. Now they were listening. But the moment you called me a beggar, you lost more than a client. You lost a chance to evolve. I let the words hang in the air. I'm not here to shame you. I'm here to remind you that your job isn't to count money. It's to recognize the humanity of the person holding it. I stepped back from the mic. Silence. Then a slow ripple of applause. Then louder, until the whole room was on its feet. Later, the regional director approached me. He extended a hand. "Miss Carter, your speech was powerful. Necessary." I shook his hand politely. "Then act on it." He nodded solemnly. "We'll be reviewing our customer service policies." I walked away before he could turn my story into a slogan. Outside, Darren was waiting by the car. "Well," he asked. I shrugged. I gave them truth. The rest is up to them. We drove in silence for a while, the city whirring past outside the window. Then he said, "Do you still think about that day?" "Every time I withdraw cash," I said, smirking. "But not with anger anymore." He laughed.
Same.
"I can't even use an ATM without feeling guilty." "You should." He mock-pouted. Ruthless. But we both smiled. Because now it was just a memory. Not a wound. Not a weight. Just a beginning. In the months following the summit, I noticed something odd. People started reaching out, not just artists or foundation hopefuls, but professionals, bankers, executives, even teachers from my old high school. They weren't asking for money. They were asking for perspective. One message stood out. It was from Tyler, the teller who had been there the day Darren embarrassed me, and the same one who had avoided eye contact at the summit. His email was simple. "Danielle, I owe you an apology." I stood there and said nothing. I was scared of Darren, scared of losing my job. But I saw the pain in your eyes that day, and I've thought about it more times than I can count. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. And if you ever need a volunteer for the foundation, anything, I'd like to help.
Tyler.
I stared at the message for a long time, then replied, "Tyler, thank you for your message. That day hurt, yes, but so has staying quiet for most of my life. You want to make it right? Show up. We've got a supply drive this weekend. Wear comfortable shoes."
Danielle.
He did show up. Early, even. Tyler ended up staying the whole day, helping kids pick out sketch pads and handing out pencils like they were gold bars. He didn't ask for special attention. He just worked. When we closed up, he shook my hand like it meant something. That's what growth looked like. Quiet, unannounced.
Real.
Meanwhile, Darren and I kept building. The Revival Theater opened just before summer, reborn with fresh paint, polished floors, and a stage that practically begged for stories. Opening night featured a youth play called The Unheard, written and performed by local teens. It told the story of being overlooked, underestimated, and breaking free. By the end, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. including Darren's. After the curtain call, one of the young actors approached him backstage. "You used to be that bank guy, right?" the boy asked, grinning. Darren chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck.
Yeah.
"Guilty." The boy shrugged.
Cool.
"You're way better now." We laughed all the way back to the car. Later that week, our foundation hit its 100th project milestone. 100 fully funded creative ventures, murals, albums, galleries, community studios, art therapy classes. We celebrated with a private dinner at the center, just the core team. Darren gave a toast. "None of this would have happened if Danielle hadn't walked back into that bank," he said. "She didn't come to prove a point. She came to reclaim her story. And along the way, she helped rewrite mine too." The team raised their glasses. I tried to smile without crying. Because he wasn't wrong. That day in the bank wasn't just a humiliation. It was a line in the sand. And I'd chosen to cross it. To claim the space no one ever handed me. To become not just someone with wealth, but someone with impact. And to help others do the same. The next morning, I walked into Grace's store before it opened. I stood among the neatly stacked paints, the easels, the brushes displayed like sacred tools. Then I sat at the small desk in the corner, the one I used to draw at when Grace let me hang around after school. And I started sketching again. Not for a gallery. Not for validation. Just for me. Outside, the sun rose quietly over Lexington. Inside, I drew a phoenix. Not rising. Already in flight. A few weeks after the 100 project milestone, the Braddock Carter Foundation received a letter, an actual letter, handwritten in careful block letters on lined notebook paper. It was from a 12-year-old named AJ. "Dear Miss Carter, my name is AJ, and I go to Newbridge Middle. I never liked school, but I like drawing. I thought I was weird until my teacher told me about your place. She said you help kids like me. My mom works at night, and we don't have a lot, but I draw superheroes because I want to be one someday. I just wanted to say thank you for making a place where I can draw and not feel dumb. My teacher says you used to be like me. I hope I can be like you one day. Love,
AJ.
I read the letter twice. Then I photocopied it and pinned it on the wall beside my desk. That letter said more about our work than any article ever had. I shared it with Darren the next day. He read it silently, then wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. "Kid writes better than half our donors," he said, voice cracking. He wasn't wrong. That Friday, AJ showed up at the Grace store during our open art night. He brought his sketchbook, filled with drawings of superheroes that looked like kids from his neighborhood, with mismatched socks and backpacks instead of capes. "I think they save people by listening," AJ said shyly, flipping through the pages. "Smart hero," I told him. "The world needs more of those." AJ came every Friday after that. Sometimes with new drawings. Sometimes just to be around other kids who understood. Watching him reminded me of myself. Not the billionaire version. The one who stood in that same store once upon a time with big ideas and no one to fund them. One night after AJ left, Darren said, "You think he'll make it?" "He already is," I said. The momentum kept growing. Our foundation started getting national press. The $99 billionaire had become a moniker, but now people were paying attention for more than the shock factor. I was invited to Washington, D.C., to speak on a panel about creative equity. Not politics. Not economics. Just the importance of access to art, to tools, to self-expression. Before I boarded the plane, Darren handed me a small box. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it after your panel." I did. Inside was a silver pen, engraved with a single phrase. "You write your story now." I stared at it for a long time. Because he was right. For years, others had written my story for me. Teachers, parents, bosses, even Darren. But not anymore. Now I was the author. And with every project, every student, every sketchbook we handed out, I was helping others write theirs too. That night, I returned home to Lexington, took the pen, and signed off on our next 3 grants. 3 new gardens. 3 more sparks. And I knew we weren't even close to done. Autumn rolled into Kentucky like a watercolor wash, burnt orange, deep burgundy, soft amber leaves carpeting the sidewalks. The seasons seemed to change more gently now, or maybe I had just stopped rushing through them. At the Braddock Carter Foundation, we launched our fall initiative, the 99 Project. It was Darren's idea, actually. He brought it up one evening while we reviewed applications from 3 small towns requesting support for mobile art buses. What if we built something around the number 99? He asked. To reclaim it. Reclaim it how? Every month, we select 99 recipients, students, artists, teachers, and give them direct microgrants. No red tape, no essays. Just $99, no questions asked. Enough for supplies, a bus ticket, a month of internet. Whatever they need to keep creating. I stared at him, genuinely impressed. You realize the irony here, right? I asked. You're the one who mocked me for asking for $99. Now you're leading with it. He smiled.
Exactly.
If $99 was enough to trigger that moment for us, imagine what it could do in the right hands.
So we launched it.
Quietly. No press. Just a form online, shared through grassroots partners. Within 2 weeks, we had over 2,000 submissions. One came from a grandmother in Detroit teaching her grandkids watercolor during homeschooling. Another came from a teen in Arizona who built puppets from cardboard and posted shows on TikTok. Every application felt like a secret door to someone's inner world. We read every one. We sent the money. And we added a note. You matter. Keep creating. It was the most fulfilling program we'd started to date. Small, fast, real. A direct counter to everything that had once tried to tell me art wasn't worth investing in. Darren managed the program.
Personally.
Every week, he called at least 10 recipients just to hear their stories. I used to talk to millionaires who only cared about tax sheltering, he told me. Now I talk to people who cry because we sent them $99. It feels sacred. I nodded. That's because it is. We didn't always get it right. Some projects fell through. Some recipients ghosted us after cashing the check. But most of them sent thank you notes, sketches, photos of their work. One even sent cookies. That fall, we also held our first Creators Reunion, inviting every artist we'd ever funded to Lexington for a weekend of connection, collaboration, and celebration. We expected 50 people to RSVP. We got over 300. The entire foundation team kicked into high gear, securing venues, housing, even outdoor tents to accommodate workshops. Artists flew in from around the country. They shared their work, taught each other new techniques, and filled the city with color and noise. During one breakout session, I walked by a circle of dancers, painters, and musicians riffing together in real time. It looked like chaos, but it sounded like magic. Darren stood beside me, hands in his pockets. You built this, he said. I shook my head. We built this. He looked down at his shoes. You really believe that? I do.
And I meant it.
Because this wasn't just my redemption arc anymore. It was his too. That weekend, the city felt transformed, not by money, but by meaning. The air was thick with the scent of paint, fried food, and possibility. At the closing ceremony, we handed out blank journals and asked each artist to write one thing they'd never been brave enough to say aloud. We didn't read them. We just sealed them in a time capsule labeled Volume 1. We'd open it in 10 years. Back at my apartment that night, I opened my own journal and wrote, I am no longer waiting for permission. Then I sealed the envelope with my initials. Whatever came next, I would meet it with open hands and open heart. Because the girl who once stood in line for $99 now stood at the helm of a movement. And her story wasn't finished yet. 1 year to the day after I walked into Whitestone Credit Union and Darren reduced me to rubble in front of a dozen strangers, we held an event. Not to celebrate revenge. To celebrate roots. We called it the Full Circle Gathering. The location? The same bank. Yes, Whitestone. But this time, we rented the lobby. Not for a transaction. For transformation. The event was invite-only. Foundation staff, artists, community members, and yes, even some of the bank's own employees. Darren coordinated the entire thing with Whitestone's new regional manager. The previous one had moved on after some very public leadership scrutiny, courtesy of an internal investigation quietly sparked by my summit speech months earlier. We transformed the sterile lobby with lights, plants, canvases, and a temporary mural painted live by a collective of teens from Grace's after-school program. The theme: Break the Frame. As guests arrived, music filled the space, not classical this time, but a mix of live jazz and spoken word. Darren and I stood off to the side, watching it unfold. "Hard to believe this is the same place," he said. I nodded. "I almost don't recognize it. But I recognize you," he said. "That day you stood your ground. I tried to knock you down, and you stood taller than I ever could have imagined. You tried to bury me," I said softly, smiling. "But I was already rooted." At the center of the lobby, we unveiled a sculpture titled The $99 Moment, a small bronze hand holding a folded paper receipt, inscribed with the words,
Value isn't assigned.
"It's realized." The artist?
AJ.
Now 13 and already showing in local galleries. When we called him up to speak, he looked nervous. I handed him the mic, gave his shoulder a squeeze. He cleared his throat. "Ms. Carter believed in me before I believed in myself. So this is for anyone who's ever been told they're too small to matter. You're not." The crowd applauded. Some people cried. I did too. Because there it was. Proof that the full circle moment didn't need to be loud or flashy. It just needed to be real. Later that night, long after the guests had gone and the paint had dried, Darren and I walked through the empty bank one last time. He paused in front of the teller window where it all started. "Do you ever wish that day never happened?" he asked. I thought for a long time, then said,
No.
"Because without that day, none of this would exist." He nodded. Neither would I. We stood there in silence, no longer haunted by the past, but grounded in the present. I had walked in here once with nothing but a worn ID and a trembling voice. Now I walked out with a foundation of family and a legacy made not of money, but meaning. That's the thing about redemption stories. They don't begin with success. They begin with someone seeing you at your lowest and still daring to rise. That $99? It wasn't the end of my worth. It was the beginning of my becoming.